My name is Claire Mitchell, and I'm 29 years old. What I'm about to tell you is the story of how my husband tried to steal my entire inheritance while I was fighting for my life, and how I destroyed him with a secret he never saw coming. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from right now. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button because you're about to hear something that will change how you think about trust and betrayal. Imagine discovering that while you're lying in a hospital bed, vomiting from chemotherapy and losing your hair, your husband is transferring your entire inheritance to his mistress. That's exactly what happened to me. But here's the thing, my mother never trusted him, and she left me something he didn't know about. Something that would turn his perfect crime into his complete destruction. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about what happens when someone underestimates a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to gain. You know, people always say that cancer changes you, but they never tell you how it strips away every illusion you've ever had about the people you love. When I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer at 29, I thought the disease would be my biggest enemy. I was wrong. The real enemy was sleeping next to me every night, pretending to love me while plotting to take everything my mother had worked her entire life to build. Mark was my college sweetheart. We'd been together for 8 years, married for 3. He was the kind of man who opened doors, remembered anniversaries, and charmed everyone he met. My friends used to tell me how lucky I was. My mother? She was never quite sold on him, but I thought it was just protective mother instincts. I wish I'd listened to her. When Mom died 2 years before my cancer diagnosis, she left me everything. A beautiful lake house estate that had been in our family for generations, and a trust fund that would have set me up for life. Mark seemed supportive, even proud of what I'd inherited. He'd wrap his arms around me and say things like, "Your mom would be so proud of the woman you've become, and we're going to make such beautiful memories in that house." But when the cancer hit, everything changed. The first few weeks after my diagnosis, Mark played the devoted husband perfectly. He drove me to appointments, held my hand during consultations, and even cried with me when the oncologist explained the treatment plan. I remember one night after my first chemo session, I was so sick I couldn't even lift my head off the pillow. Mark tucked the blankets around me and whispered, "We're a team, Claire. We're going to beat this together." I believed him. God, I needed to believe him. But as the weeks went on, something shifted. The man who used to text me every hour was suddenly too busy to respond. The husband who used to bring me soup and sit with me during treatment started making excuses. "I've got that big presentation at work," he'd say. Or, "Traffic is really bad today, I might not make it to your appointment." I started going to chemo alone. I'd sit in that sterile room with a 4 dripping poison into my veins, watching other patients with their families, their friends, their partners holding their hands. And I'd text Mark updates that he'd respond to hours later with a simple, "Hope you're feeling better." The worst part? I blamed myself. I thought maybe I was being too needy, too demanding. Here I was, bald and sick and weak, and I was asking too much of this man who'd already given me so much. I actually apologized to him one night. I said, "I'm sorry I'm such a burden right now. I know this is hard for you too." He looked me right in the eyes and said, "Don't worry about it, babe. I'm not going anywhere." What a joke that turned out to be. While I was apologizing for being a burden, Mark was busy transferring my inheritance to fund his new life with a bleach blonde Pilates instructor named Cassandra. While I was losing my hair, he was buying her a luxury condo downtown. While I was fighting for my life, he was planning his future without me in it. But here's what Mark didn't know. My mother was a smart woman, and she never fully trusted him. The week before she died, she made me promise to keep a secret backup plan. She'd worked with a private family attorney to create a sealed document that would protect everything she'd left me. It wasn't in the regular paperwork. It was hidden, secured, and ironclad. And when I discovered what Mark had done, when I realized the full scope of his betrayal, I knew exactly what I had to do. Subscribe if you believe that people who betray those they're supposed to protect deserve consequences. Only those who think betrayal should go unpunished won't subscribe. You know that feeling when everything in your life seems to be falling into place perfectly? That was me 5 years ago. I had just landed my dream job at Henderson and Associates, one of Seattle's most prestigious architectural firms. 28 years old, designing sustainable office buildings and luxury condos, with a corner desk overlooking Elliott Bay. Every morning, I'd walk into that glass tower feeling like I was exactly where I belonged. But the real prize wasn't my career. It was Mark. God, Mark was everything you'd want in a partner. We met during our senior year at the University of Washington. I was drowning in my thesis project, this impossible design for a community center that had to meet about 15 different environmental standards. I was camped out in the architecture library at 2 a.m, surrounded by coffee cups and crumpled sketches, when this guy walked over. "You look like you could use some help," he said, and I looked up to see these warm brown eyes and this genuine smile. Mark was studying business, but he had this way of seeing problems from angles I'd never considered. He sat with me for 3 hours that night, helping me reorganize my entire approach. Not doing the work for me, but asking the right questions that helped me find my own solutions. That's how Mark was with everything. He had this gift for making you feel like the smartest person in the room, while quietly making everything better. When we graduated, I was terrified we'd drift apart. I was staying in Seattle for work, and he had job offers all over the country. But Mark turned down a position in San Francisco to take a sales job with a tech startup here. "Seattle's growing," he told me. "Besides, I can't imagine being anywhere you're not." We moved in together 6 months later. Mark found this perfect little craftsman house in Fremont, and he negotiated the rent down somehow. He always had this way with people. The landlord loved him within 5 minutes. Everyone loved Mark. My coworkers would ask when he was joining us for happy hour. My friends would text me asking if Mark had any single brothers. Even my dad, who'd never approved of any guy I dated, would end our phone calls asking me to tell Mark hello. Mark made everything feel effortless. When I was stressed about a deadline, he'd show up at my office with my favorite Thai food. When I felt overwhelmed by Seattle's social scene, he'd plan quiet weekends where we'd hike the trails around Snoqualmie Falls or drive up to the San Juan Islands. He remembered everything. My favorite coffee order, the names of my college friends, the anniversary of my grandmother's death. The first real test of our relationship came during my 3rd year in Seattle. Mom called me on a Tuesday evening, and I could hear something different in her voice immediately. "Claire, honey, I need to tell you something," she said, and my stomach dropped before she even continued. The doctors had found something during her routine mammogram. Stage 1 breast cancer, but they'd caught it early. The treatment plan was aggressive but promising. I booked a flight to Portland that same night. Mark didn't even hesitate. "I'm coming with you," he said, already pulling out his laptop to request time off work. For the next 8 months, Mark drove down to Portland with me every other weekend. He'd sit in those sterile waiting rooms during Mom's chemo sessions, bringing crossword puzzles and terrible jokes to keep us distracted. He researched clinical trials and second opinions. He coordinated with my dad to make sure someone was always there for Mom's appointments. When Mom lost her hair, Mark surprised her with this beautiful silk scarf collection he'd ordered online. "Every woman deserves to feel elegant," he told her, and Mom started crying right there in her kitchen. Good tears for once. Mark had this way of knowing exactly what people needed, even when they didn't know it themselves. Mom beat the cancer. The doctors declared her officially in remission right before Christmas that year. We celebrated at her favorite restaurant in Portland, and Mark raised his glass for a toast. "To strong women," he said, looking between Mom and me, "and to never taking the people we love for granted." Mom reached over and squeezed his hand. "You're part of this family now, Mark," she told him. "You know that, right?" 2 months later, Mom was gone. Not the cancer. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car on her way home from book club. The call came at 11:30 on a Thursday night. Mark held me while I sobbed into the phone with the police officer, and he never left my side through the funeral arrangements, the legal proceedings, the overwhelming grief that followed. That's when I inherited the lake house. Mom had bought the property 20 years earlier with money from my grandmother's estate. 40 acres on Lake Chelan, with this stunning mid-century modern house that Mom had always planned to retire to. She'd spent years slowly renovating it, turning it into this perfect retreat. The inheritance also included a substantial trust fund that Mom had been quietly building. She'd been living modestly in Portland while investing everything she could for my future. Mark was incredible through all of it. He handled the estate lawyers when I was too grief-stricken to focus. He drove over to Lake Chelan with me to see the property for the first time since Mom's death. We stood on the deck overlooking the water, and Mark put his arm around me. "Your mom wanted you to have security," he said. "She wanted to know you'd always be taken care of." I leaned into him, feeling grateful for the first time since losing her. I had Mark. I had this beautiful place that represented Mom's love. I had financial security I'd never imagined possible. The trust fund changed everything. Suddenly, we could afford to buy a house in Seattle instead of renting. Mark found this gorgeous craftsman in Capitol Hill with original hardwood floors and a kitchen that looked out onto a garden. "It's perfect for entertaining," he said, and he was right. We started hosting dinner parties, weekend barbecues, game nights. Mark was the perfect host. He'd remember everyone's dietary restrictions, mix the perfect cocktails, keep conversations flowing when they started to lag. People started referring to us as Mark and Claire, like we were this single unit. We became the couple other people wanted to be. Friends would ask us for relationship advice. Coworkers would comment on how lucky I was. "You two are like something out of a romantic comedy," my friend Sarah told me after one of our dinner parties. "Mark just adores you. It's obvious in everything he does." Mark proposed on the deck of the lake house during a weekend trip we'd taken for my 30th birthday. He'd planned everything perfectly. A private chef, string lights hung between the pine trees, my favorite wine from a small vineyard we'd discovered during a trip to Yakima Valley. The ring was exactly what I would have chosen for myself, this simple solitaire setting that caught the light from the lake. "Claire," he said, getting down on one knee as the sun set behind the mountains, "you're my everything. Will you marry me?" Of course I said yes. How could I not? Mark was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. Supportive, thoughtful, ambitious, but not in a way that overshadowed my own dreams. He loved my career, bragged about my projects to his friends and colleagues. He made me feel beautiful, intelligent, capable of anything. When I doubted myself, Mark was there with exactly the right words to build me back up. We started planning the wedding immediately. Mark had opinions about everything, but in this charming, enthusiastic way. He wanted to make sure our day was perfect. He researched photographers and caterers, tasted cakes with me, helped me choose between invitation designs. "This is our chance to celebrate everything we've built together," he'd say, spreading vendor brochures across our dining room table. "I want everyone to see how incredible you are." The wedding was set for the following October at the lake house. Mark's idea. "Your mom would have loved this," he told me, and I knew he was right. We'd have the ceremony on the deck where he'd proposed, with the mountains and water as our backdrop. The reception would be in the renovated barn that Mom had turned into this beautiful event space. Intimate, elegant, meaningful. Everything was perfect. My career was thriving. I'd just been promoted to senior associate at the firm. Mark's startup was expanding, and he'd been given a promotion to regional sales director. We had this beautiful home, this stunning wedding venue, financial security most couples our age could only dream of. Friends and family constantly told us how lucky we were, how perfect we seemed together. I believed them completely. Mark was attentive and supportive, always interested in my day, always ready with encouragement when work got stressful. He'd bring me coffee in bed every morning, leave little notes in my lunch bag, text me random "thinking of you" messages throughout the day. He made me feel cherished in ways I hadn't even known I wanted. Looking back now, I can see how carefully constructed it all was. How Mark positioned himself as this perfect partner, this man who completed me. But at the time, I just felt grateful. I felt like the luckiest woman alive. I found the lump on a Tuesday morning in the shower. My fingers brushed against this small, hard mass just above my left breast, near my collarbone. For a second, I froze completely, water streaming down my face, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. I pressed again, and there it was. Definitely there. Definitely not normal. My mom had always been religious about self-exams after her diagnosis, and she drilled the importance into me. Knowledge is power, Claire, she'd tell me during her treatment. The earlier you catch these things, the better your chances. But somehow, I'd let myself get lazy about it. Work had been consuming, wedding planning was taking up all my free time, and I was only 31. Cancer felt like something that happened to other people. I stood in that shower for probably 10 more minutes, checking and rechecking, hoping the lump would somehow disappear. It didn't. I finally turned off the water and wrapped myself in a towel, hands shaking as I dried off. Mark was still sleeping, and I didn't want to wake him with what might be nothing. But deep down, I already knew it wasn't nothing. I called my doctor's office as soon as they opened. The receptionist was frustratingly calm when I explained what I'd found. Dr. Patterson can see you Thursday at 2, she said, like she was scheduling a routine checkup instead of what felt like the most important appointment of my life. I wanted to scream that Thursday was 2 days away, that I couldn't wait 2 days to find out if I had cancer. Instead, I took the appointment and spent the next 48 hours trying to act normal. Mark noticed something was off immediately. You seem distracted, he said over dinner Tuesday night. Everything okay at work? I almost told him then, but something held me back. Maybe it was superstition, like talking about it would make it real. Maybe I just wanted to protect him from worrying until I knew for sure. Just a difficult client, I said, and Mark nodded sympathetically, launching into a story about his own challenging customer situation. Thursday afternoon, I sat in Dr. Patterson's examination room, wearing that ridiculous paper gown, trying to regulate my breathing. She was thorough but gentle, palpating the area around the lump with practice fingers. Her expression remained neutral, which somehow made everything worse. I'd like to schedule you for an ultrasound and possibly a biopsy, she said finally. This could be many things, Claire. Cysts are very common in women your age. But given your family history, we want to be cautious. The ultrasound was scheduled for the following Monday. 5 more days of not knowing, of carrying this secret that felt like it was burning a hole through me. I finally told Mark that weekend, while we were making breakfast on Saturday morning. He was flipping pancakes, humming some song he'd heard on the radio, and I just blurted it out. I found a lump. I'm having it checked on Monday. Mark went completely still, spatula frozen halfway to the plate. Then he turned around, and I saw something in his face I'd never seen before. Fear, but also this immediate shift into protective mode. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, crossing to where I sat at the kitchen island and pulling me into his arms. You shouldn't have been dealing with this alone. I didn't want to worry you if it was nothing, I said into his shoulder, finally letting myself cry for the first time since finding the lump. Mark held me tight, stroking my hair, making all the right comforting sounds. We'll get through this together, he said. Whatever it is, we're a team. You know that, right? The ultrasound showed something suspicious enough to warrant a biopsy. More waiting, this time with Mark beside me in every waiting room, holding my hand through every procedure. He took time off work without complaint, rearranged his schedule to drive me to appointments, researched doctors and treatment options online. We're going to beat this, he kept saying, and I loved him for saying we instead of you. The biopsy results came back on a Thursday. Stage 2 invasive ductal carcinoma. The words hit like a physical blow, even though part of me had been preparing for them all week. Dr. Patterson explained the treatment plan. Chemotherapy first to shrink the tumor, then surgery, then radiation. 6 months minimum, possibly longer depending on how I responded. Mark asked all the right questions. About success rates, about clinical trials, about how the treatment would affect my daily life. He took notes in this small notebook he'd brought, writing everything down in his neat handwriting. When Dr. Patterson left us alone to process the information, Mark took my hands and looked directly into my eyes. We're going to fight this, he said. Whatever it takes. I'm not going anywhere. I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? This was Mark, who'd been by my side through my mother's cancer, through her death, through every challenge we'd faced together. This was the man who'd held me while I grieved, who'd handled legal paperwork when I was too overwhelmed to function, who'd proposed to me with a speech about never taking the people we love for granted. We postponed the wedding immediately. Mark handled all the vendor calls, explained the situation, rescheduled everything for the following spring. "Your health comes first," he told me when I started crying about the deposits we'd lose, the disappointing our families. "Everything else can wait." The first round of chemotherapy was brutal. I'd heard horror stories, but experiencing it was different. The nausea hit me like waves, relentless and overwhelming. I lost 15 pounds in the first month because I could barely keep anything down. The fatigue was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not just tired, but this bone-deep exhaustion that made simple tasks feel impossible. Mark was incredible those first few weeks. He drove me to every appointment, sitting in those uncomfortable chairs for hours while poison dripped into my veins through and through. He researched anti-nausea medications, brought me ginger tea and saltines, held my hair back when I threw up. When I started losing my hair in clumps, Mark helped me shave it all off, then took me shopping for scarves and hats. "You're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," he told me, kissing my bald head. The medical bills started piling up almost immediately. Even with my insurance through the architecture firm, the copays and deductibles were staggering. Each chemo session cost hundreds of dollars out of pocket. The anti-nausea medications that actually worked weren't fully covered. The wig I wanted to buy for work functions was considered cosmetic and therefore not covered at all. Thank God for Mom's trust fund. For the first time since inheriting it, I felt grateful for her financial planning in a practical, immediate way. The cancer treatment was going to cost tens of thousands of dollars, but we could afford it. I could focus on getting better instead of worrying about money. "Your mom knew what she was doing," Mark said when I expressed guilt about using the inheritance for medical bills. "She wanted you to be taken care of." This is exactly what she would have wanted. But something started changing around the third month of treatment. Subtle things at first. Mark seemed more distracted during my appointments, checking his phone instead of paying attention to what the doctors were saying. He started staying later at work, claiming his boss was putting pressure on him because of all the time he'd taken off for my treatments. "I need to prove I'm still committed to the company," he explained when I asked about it. "I can't afford to lose this job, especially not now with all these medical expenses." I understood. Of course I understood. Mark was under enormous stress, trying to balance his career with being a caregiver. The treatment was taking a toll on both of us, and it wasn't fair to expect him to be perfectly supportive every single moment. But I started noticing other changes too. The way he'd sigh when I asked him to bring me water, or help me to the bathroom when I was too weak to walk steady. The way he'd scroll through his phone during our conversations, like he was somewhere else entirely. "Maybe you should ask your dad to come stay for a while," Mark suggested after a particularly difficult week where I'd been too sick to do anything but lie in bed. "Or hire someone to help out during the day while I'm at work." The suggestion stung more than it should have. My dad lived in Portland and had his own life, his own job. And the idea of hiring a stranger to take care of me felt like admitting that Mark couldn't handle it anymore. "I thought we were a team," I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. Mark looked genuinely surprised by my reaction. "We are a team," he said. "But I'm drowning here, Claire. Between work and taking care of you and trying to manage everything else, I'm barely keeping my head above water. I'm just trying to find solutions that work for both of us." I felt terrible for making him feel guilty. Here he was, sacrificing his career and his own well-being to take care of me, and I was being selfish and demanding. The cancer was making me hypersensitive, reading too much into every interaction. Of course Mark was stressed. Of course he needed help. I was being unreasonable. But the changes kept accumulating. Mark started coming home later from work, sometimes not until after I'd already gone to bed. He'd bring takeout for himself, but forget to get anything for me, then seem surprised when I mentioned I hadn't eaten dinner. "I thought you said you weren't hungry," he'd say, and maybe I had said that. The chemo was affecting my memory, making everything feel fuzzy and uncertain. The house started feeling different too. Mark had always been meticulous about keeping things clean and organized, but now dishes sat in the sink for days. Mail piled up on the kitchen counter. Laundry overflowed from the hamper in our bedroom. When I mentioned it, Mark would get defensive. "I'm doing the best I can," he'd say. "If you want things done differently, maybe you should do them yourself." But I couldn't do them myself. That was the horrible reality of chemotherapy. Some days I could barely get out of bed, let alone do household chores. I was completely dependent on Mark for everything, and that dependence was starting to feel like a burden to both of us. I'd lie awake at night, listening to him breathing beside me, wondering if he resented me for getting sick, for disrupting the perfect life we'd built together. My friends tried to help, but Mark had this way of deflecting their offers. "Claire needs her rest," he'd tell them when they wanted to visit. "The doctors say too much stimulation isn't good for her right now." It wasn't entirely untrue. I did get overwhelmed easily, and large groups of people felt exhausting. But I started to realize that Mark was controlling who I saw and when making decisions about my social life without consulting me. The worst part was how reasonable he made everything sound. When Sarah offered to bring dinner one evening, Mark explained that I'd been having stomach problems and probably couldn't eat whatever she was planning to make. When my colleague Jake wanted to stop by with some work files I'd requested, Mark said I'd been sleeping poorly and needed to avoid work stress. Every refusal was couched in concern for my health, making it impossible to argue without seeming ungrateful. By the 4th month of treatment, I felt completely isolated. My world had shrunk to doctor's appointments, chemotherapy sessions, and the 4 walls of our bedroom. Mark was my only connection to the outside world, and increasingly, he seemed resentful of that responsibility. I started to feel like I was disappearing, not just physically from the cancer treatment, but emotionally, socially, in every way that mattered. The trust fund money that had initially felt like such a blessing started feeling different too. Mark had always been involved in our finances, but now he was making decisions about my inheritance without consulting me. I moved some money around to cover next month's medical bills, he'd mention casually over breakfast. Or I paid off my student loans with the trust fund account. It didn't make sense to keep paying interest when we have the money sitting there. When I questioned him about it, Mark would remind me that we were getting married, that his debts would become my debts anyway. "We're building a life together," he'd say. "Your mom wanted to provide security for your future, and I'm part of that future." Right? It made sense logically, but something about it felt wrong. Like the money that was supposed to represent my mother's love and protection was slowly becoming something else entirely. I started having panic attacks during this period, though I didn't recognize them as such at first. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, feeling like I couldn't breathe. The room would feel too small, too dark, too quiet except for Mark's steady breathing beside me. I'd lie there wondering if this was what the rest of my life would look like, being dependent on someone who seemed increasingly frustrated by my needs, watching my inheritance disappear while I was too sick to advocate for myself. But then I'd catch myself thinking those thoughts and feel guilty all over again. Mark was under incredible stress. He was sacrificing his career, his social life, his freedom to take care of me. The least I could do was be grateful instead of paranoid. The cancer was making me think irrationally, making me suspicious of the man who loved me enough to stay by my side through the worst thing that had ever happened to me. Have you ever been in a situation where you completely trusted someone, only to have warning signs you ignored? Share your experience in the comments. You know that feeling when the ground beneath you starts to shift, but you can't quite pin down why? That's where I was 6 months into my cancer treatment, trying to hold on to some sense of normal. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee, and I was sitting in the waiting room, staring at my phone. Mark was supposed to be there for my checkup. He'd promised. But the appointment time came and went, and my text to him sat unanswered. I told myself he was just busy at work. He'd been so good at the start, holding my hand through every scan. But lately, he was a ghost. When he finally called back that night, his voice was clipped. "Sorry, Claire. Got held up at the office. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was, not really, but I nodded into the phone like he could see me. "It's fine," I said, my chest tight. I managed. I always managed. The next week it was therapy. He swore he'd drive me, but when I came downstairs, the car was gone. His text read, Something came up. Take an Uber. I stood in the driveway, the autumn chill creeping through my sweater, wondering when my husband had become a stranger. His excuses piled up like unpaid bills. Too much on my plate, he'd say, or, I'm wiped, Claire, let's talk tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. He'd shuffle into the kitchen, eyes on his phone, barely looking at me. I'd ask how his day was, and he'd mumble, fine, before disappearing to the garage or God knows where. I started apologizing. Can you believe that? Me, bald from chemo, saying sorry for needing him. I don't want to be a burden, I told him one night, my voice cracking. He just sighed, like I was the one exhausting him. You're not, he said, but his eyes were already somewhere else. Then there were the moments that didn't add up. One day, he came home whistling, his mood bright as a summer afternoon. He hadn't been like that in months. I caught a whiff of new cologne, sharp, expensive, not the one I'd bought him for Christmas. Where'd you get that? I asked, trying to keep it light. He shrugged, too quick. Sample at the mall. I noticed his shirt was new, too crisp and fitted. When had he gone shopping? He hated shopping. That night, I heard him in the bathroom, his voice low, laughing into his phone. The door was cracked, and I stood there, frozen, straining to hear. Yeah, tomorrow's good, he said, then hung up fast when he saw me. Work call, he muttered, brushing past. My friends started noticing. At a coffee shop meetup, Lisa leaned in, her brows knit. Where's Mark been, Claire? You're going through hell, and he's MIA. I stirred my tea, the spoon clinking too loud. He's just stressed, I said, but the words felt hollow. Jen chimed in softer. He wasn't at your last appointment, was he? Or the fundraiser? I stared at the table, their concern wrapping around me like a blanket I didn't deserve. I wanted to defend him, to say they didn't get it. But they were right. He was slipping away, and I was too tired to chase him. Then came Cassandra. I didn't know her name at first, just saw glimpses of her on his phone screen before he tilted it away. Bleach blonde hair, Pilates-toned arms, a smile that screamed Instagram filters. I caught her profile one night when he left his phone on the counter. At Cassandra Fit Life. All smoothie bowls and sunrise workouts. Her posts were a curated dream, yoga on the beach, captions about living your truth. I scrolled, my stomach twisting. Who was she to him? A friend? A client? I didn't ask. Not yet. When I finally did, it was after dinner. He was on his phone again, smirking at some message. Who's Cassandra? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. What? She's just someone from the gym. Why are you snooping? I wasn't snooping, I told him, but he was already on the offensive. You're paranoid, Claire. It's the meds messing with you. His words hit like a slap. I stood there, dishes in the sink, feeling the room shrink. Was I paranoid? The chemo fog made it hard to trust my own head sometimes, but this felt real. He got worse after that. Distant didn't even cover it. He'd leave early, come home late, his excuses flimsier each time. Client dinner, he'd say, or networking thing. I'd lie in bed, the house too quiet, my skin prickling with loneliness. I'd always thought fighting cancer would be the hardest thing, but this was worse. I'd look at my reflection, pale and hollow, and wonder what I'd done wrong. I tried rationalizing it. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe he needed space. But deep down, I knew. He was pulling away, and I was too weak to stop it. One night, I sat on the couch, scrolling through Cassandra's posts again. Her latest was a mirror selfie, all sports bra and confidence. Embracing new beginnings, the caption read. My throat closed up. New beginnings. Was that what Mark was chasing? I thought about confronting him, demanding answers, but the thought made my hands shake. What if I was wrong? What if I was right? I didn't know which was scarier. So, let me ask you something. What would you do if someone you trusted started acting completely different during your most vulnerable moment? Would you confront them or investigate first? You ever have a moment where the world just stops and everything you thought you knew crumbles? That's what happened to me one rainy Tuesday, sitting in our living room, the chemo nausea clawing at my stomach. I wasn't looking for answers. Not really. But sometimes, the truth finds you anyway. Mark had left his laptop open on the coffee table, a careless mistake for someone who'd been so guarded lately. I don't know why I clicked. Maybe it was the way he'd been dodging me, or the memory of Cassandra's filtered smile on his phone. My fingers moved before my brain caught up, opening his email. And there it was, a thread with her. Subject line: this weekend. My heart pounded as I scrolled. "Can't wait to see you," she wrote, with a winking emoji. His reply was worse. "You're worth every second I steal." I stared at the screen, the words blurring. Steal. From me. From us. I clicked further, my hands shaking. Hotel receipts, dinner reservations, a whole secret life laid out in pixels. They'd been meeting for months right under my nose, while I was fighting for my life. I found a photo attachment, Mark and Cassandra, her bleach blonde hair catching the light, his arm around her waist. He was smiling, the way he used to smile at me. I slammed the laptop shut, my breath ragged. The room spun, rain tapping the windows like it was mocking me. How could he? I trusted him, loved him, and he'd built this lie while I was breaking. I stumbled to the bathroom, collapsing against the sink. My reflection stared back, pale, hollow, a stranger. I sobbed, the kind of cry that rips you apart, echoing off the tiles. I thought about every excuse, every late night, every time he'd called me paranoid. It wasn't the meds. It wasn't me. It was him, choosing her, choosing anything but me. I slid to the floor, clutching my knees, the cold seeping through my leggings. I don't know how long I stayed there, but something shifted. The tears stopped, and a quiet anger took root. I wasn't just a victim. I didn't have to be. I stood up, wiping my face. No more apologizing. No more begging for scraps of his attention. I needed a plan. I started small, practical. I took screenshots of the emails, saved them to a hidden folder on my phone. I wrote down every date, every place they'd met, cross-referencing with my calendar. Doctor's appointments, chemo sessions, times I needed him most. He'd been with her. I felt sick, but I kept going, my pen scratching the paper like a weapon. I wasn't just hurt. I was done being played. A few days later, I dug deeper. I couldn't stop myself. I logged into our bank account, something I hadn't done in months. Mark always handled the finances, said it was one less thing for me to worry about. Stupidly, I'd trusted him. The statements told a different story. Charges I didn't recognize, fancy restaurants, a jewelry store, even a weekend spa retreat. Thousands of dollars, drained while I was rationing my energy to survive. I cross-checked the dates. They matched the emails, the trips, the lies. My hands clenched the mouse. He wasn't just cheating. He was stealing from our life, from my future. Then I found the credit card he'd opened in my name. My name. Charges racked up, lingerie, wine subscriptions, things I'd never see. I called the bank, my voice steady despite the rage bubbling inside. "When was this account opened?" I asked. The rep's answer hit like a punch. 6 months ago, right after my diagnosis. He'd used my identity while I was in chemo, too weak to notice. I thanked her, hung up, and sat there, the silence deafening. The betrayal wasn't just emotional. It was calculated, cruel. I needed to know who else was involved. Was Cassandra the only one? I went back to her social media, scrolling through her tagged photos. There she was, at a bar with Mark and 2 others, a guy named Derek, some finance bro from Mark's office, and a woman, Lisa, who I vaguely remembered from a company party. Comments under the photo were cozy, familiar. Epic night. Derek wrote. Mark had liked it. I dug into Derek's profile, found more photos. Mark and Cassandra, laughing, clinking glasses. This wasn't a fling. It was a circle, a whole group who knew and said nothing. The emotional toll hit me next. I thought about the nights I'd cried alone, thinking I was a burden. The times I'd apologized for needing him. He'd let me feel small, broken, while he played house with her. The financial damage was worse than I'd imagined. Our savings gutted, my credit trashed. I couldn't afford to be sick anymore, not with this mess. I paced the kitchen, the clock ticking too loud. I wanted to scream, to smash his precious whiskey glasses. But rage wasn't enough. I needed control. That's when I got cold, focused. I started making lists. Lawyers to call, accounts to freeze, evidence to gather. I Googled divorce attorneys, found one with a rep for handling high-conflict cases. I emailed her, attaching the screenshots, my fingers steady now. I looked into private investigators, someone who could track Mark's movements, confirm what I already knew. I wasn't just fighting cancer anymore. I was fighting for me, for everything he'd tried to take. Every step felt like armor, like I was building myself back up. I thought about confronting him, storming in with the emails, the bank statements, the proof. I pictured his face, the excuses he'd sputter. But I held back. Confrontation could wait. I wanted every duck in a row, every angle covered. He'd underestimated me, thought I was too weak to fight back. He was wrong. I wasn't the Claire he'd left behind. I was something new, someone he'd regret crossing. So let me ask you, if you discovered someone had been systematically stealing from you while you were fighting for your life, what would your first move be? Legal action or personal confrontation? You know how they say knowledge is power? I was starting to get it. Every piece of evidence I gathered felt like a brick in a wall I was building around Mark, one he wouldn't see coming. It was late winter now, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, and I was sitting in my car outside the lawyer's office, my breath fogging the windows. I'd spent weeks collecting proof of his betrayal, and I wasn't about to let him slip away. I started with the small stuff. I'd wait until Mark was in the shower, his phone left on the counter, and snap photos of his texts. Cassandra's messages were bold, flirty, like she owned him. "Miss you already," she'd write, with a heart emoji. His replies were just as bad. I saved everyone, my hands steady despite the ache in my chest. I went through his laptop again, downloading bank statements, credit card bills, anything that showed the money he'd siphoned. I hid it all in a password-protected folder on my phone, labeled recipes to throw him off. He never looked twice. I wasn't alone in this. I met with Sarah, my divorce lawyer, in her sleek downtown office. She had this no-nonsense vibe, her desk stacked with files, but her eyes sharp. "You've got a strong case, Claire," she said, flipping through my screenshots. "Adultery, financial fraud, identity theft. We can hit him hard." I nodded, my fingers twisting the strap of my purse. "I don't want him to see it coming," I told her. She smiled just a little. "He won't." She suggested a private investigator, someone to dig deeper into Mark's movements. I hired one that day, a guy named Tom, ex-cop, who spoke in short, gruff sentences. "Give me a week," he said. I did. I also leaned on my friends. Lisa and Jen came over one night bringing wine and takeout. We sat in my living room, the fire crackling, and I spilled everything. "He's been cheating," I said, my voice low, "with some Pilates instructor. And he's stealing from me." Lisa's jaw dropped, her fork frozen mid-bite. "That bastard," she hissed. Jen reached for my hand, her eyes soft. "What do you need?" I needed them to keep it quiet, to back me up when the time came. They promised they would. I felt stronger with them in my corner, like I wasn't fighting alone anymore. The hardest part was pretending. I had to act like nothing was wrong, like I was still the clueless, sick wife. I'd make Mark coffee in the morning, smile when he mumbled thanks, even though I wanted to pour it over his head. "How's work?" I'd ask, keeping my voice light. He'd shrug, eyes on his phone. "Same old." I'd nod, bite my tongue, and go about my day. It was exhausting, wearing that mask, but I knew it was necessary. If he suspected I was onto him, he'd cover his tracks. Tom, the PI, set up surveillance. He tracked Mark's car, followed him to the gym, to hotels, to Cassandra's sleek condo downtown. He sent me photos, Mark and Cassandra kissing in a parking lot, his hand on her back. I stared at them in my kitchen, the fridge humming too loud, my stomach churning. Tom also got footage of Mark meeting Derek, that finance bro from his office, at a bar. They were laughing, clinking beers, like they were celebrating. I wondered what Derek knew, how deep this went. I told Tom to keep digging. I started documenting everything myself, 2. I kept a journal, noting every time Mark lied, every unexplained absence. I recorded his late-night phone calls when I could, hiding my phone under a pillow to catch his voice. "Yeah, soon," I heard him say once, his tone secretive. I didn't know what soon meant, but it fueled me. I bought a tiny camera online, set it up in the living room, disguised as a charging dock. It caught him pacing one night, texting furiously, his face lit by the screen. I saved every clip, every detail, building my case like a fortress. Then came the trap. I wanted Mark to dig his own grave, to incriminate himself without knowing it. I started small, planting seeds. One night, I left my laptop open, a fake email from a friend, hinting I was feeling better, maybe even suspicious. "You sure Mark's being honest?" the email read. "He saw it, I know he did, because he got jumpy, asked me how I was feeling out of nowhere." "Fine," I said, smiling. "Why?" He shrugged, but I saw the flicker of worry in his eyes. I got bolder. I'd mentioned Cassandra casually, like I was clueless. "Saw your gym friend's Instagram," I said one morning, stirring my tea. "She seems nice." His coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. "Who?" he asked, too quick. "Cassandra," I said, all innocent. He laughed, but it was forced. "Oh, yeah, she's just a trainer." I nodded, letting it drop, but I knew I'd rattled him. I wanted him paranoid, second-guessing himself. I set up opportunities for him to slip. I told him I'd be at chemo all day, then came home early, catching him on the phone in the garage. "Gotta go," he muttered, hanging up fast when he saw me. "Who was that?" I asked, tilting my head. "Work," he lied, his jaw tight. I smiled, said nothing, but added it to my journal. I started leaving cash in obvious places, $20 on the counter, $50 in my purse, then noted when it disappeared. It always did. Tom's photos later showed Mark handing cash to Cassandra at a cafe. Got you, I thought. I worked with Sarah to build the legal case. We drafted papers to freeze our accounts to protect what was left of my money. She prepped a lawsuit for fraud, using the credit card he'd opened in my name as leverage. "We'll bury him in court," she said, her pen tapping the desk. I wanted more than that. I wanted him humiliated, exposed. I reached out to Jen's cousin, a reporter at a local paper, fed her anonymized tips about a financial advisor cheating clients. I knew it'd circle back to Mark eventually, his reputation crumbling. Socially, I laid groundwork, too. I started showing up at events Mark skipped, charity walks, coffee with mutual friends, looking stronger, healthier. "Where's Mark?" they'd ask. I'd shrug, say, "Busy with work," letting their pity turn to suspicion. I wanted his absence noticed, his excuses questioned. Cassandra's perfect Instagram life wouldn't hold up when people started whispering. The confrontation was coming, and I was ready. I rehearsed what I'd say, how I'd lay out the evidence, emails, photos, bank records. I pictured his face, the moment he realized I wasn't broken anymore. I packed a go bag just in case, stashed it in my car. I wasn't scared. I was electric, alive with purpose. Every lie he'd told, every dollar he'd stolen, every night I'd cried alone, it was fuel. He'd thought he could outsmart me, but I was steps ahead, my trap closing around him. So, tell me, do you think revenge should be swift and emotional, or calculated and devastating? What's the most satisfying way to get justice? You ever build something up in your head so much it feels like the world hinges on that one moment? That's how it felt the night I decided to confront Mark. It was early spring, the air sharp with that damp, new leaf smell. I stood in our kitchen, the lights low, my folder of evidence, screenshots, bank statements, Tom's photos, spread across the counter like a war map. My heart was steady, my hands calm. I'd waited long enough. Mark came home late, his keys jangling as he kicked off his shoes. He didn't notice me at first, just grabbed a beer from the fridge, his phone already in his hand. "Hey," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet. He jumped, just a little, his eyes flicking to me. "Claire, you're up late." I smiled, not warm, not cold, just enough to unsettle him. "We need to talk," I said, gesturing to the counter. He frowned, stepping closer, then froze when he saw the papers. "What's this?" he asked, his voice tight. I didn't blink. "I know about Cassandra," I said. His face went pale, the beer bottle slipping slightly in his grip. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, but I cut him off. "Don't. I have emails, photos, receipts, hotel bookings, her condo, you, and Derek laughing it up at bars while I was in chemo." I slid a photo toward him and Cassandra, her blonde hair glowing under neon lights. His mouth opened, closed like a fish gasping. "Claire, it's not what you think," he started, but I held up a hand. "I'm not done." I laid it all out, piece by piece. The credit card he'd opened in my name, the thousands he'd spent on her, the cash he'd taken from my purse. "You used me," I said, my voice steady but burning. "While I was fighting cancer, you were stealing my life." He tried to interrupt, his voice rising. "You're twisting this." I was stressed, okay? I needed an outlet. An outlet. I laughed, sharp and bitter. "An outlet? I was dying, Mark. And you chose her." His eyes darted to the door, like he could run from this. I stepped closer. "You're not walking away. Not this time." I pulled out my phone, played a clip from the living room camera, him on a call, promising Cassandra soon. His face crumpled, denial giving way to panic. "Claire, please," he said, his voice breaking. "We can fix this." I shook my head. "No. You don't get to fix this. You get to face it." I told him about the lawyer, the fraud charges, the frozen accounts. "You thought I was too weak to notice," I said. "You were wrong." For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes, real fear. I'd taken back the power, and it felt like fire in my veins. He slumped into a chair, muttering, "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't care." I'd spent months crying, doubting myself, while he built his fantasy. Now he was the one shrinking, and I stood taller. "You'll hear from my lawyer," I said, gathering my papers. "And Mark, don't come back tomorrow." I walked away, leaving him there, the kitchen clock ticking like a countdown. The legal fallout came fast. Sarah, my lawyer, filed the divorce papers the next day, citing adultery and financial fraud. We hit him with everything: lawsuits for identity theft, demands for restitution. I sat in her office, the city skyline gray through the window, as she walked me through it. "He's looking at serious penalties," she said, her pen circling numbers. "We've got the credit card records, the bank transfers. It's airtight." I nodded, my jaw tight. "Good." The courtroom was sterile, all polished wood and humming lights. Mark sat across from me, his tie crooked, his lawyer whispering frantically. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I didn't care. I wasn't there for apologies. I was there for justice. The public exposure hit harder. Jen's cousin, the reporter, ran the story. Not Mark's name, not yet, but close enough. Local financial advisor embroiled in fraud scandal. I'd fed her just enough. Anonymous tips, redacted documents. It spread like wildfire. Friends texted me, shocked. "Is this about Mark?" Lisa asked over coffee. I shrugged, sipped my latte. "Karma's funny like that," I said. Social media buzzed. Cassandra's perfect Instagram posts suddenly flooded with vague, shady comments. "Living your truth, huh?" one read. I didn't smile, but I wanted to. Mark's world unraveled. His clients dropped him, his office reassigned, him to a desk job pending investigation. Derek distanced himself, posting some nonsense about focusing on family. Cassandra's Pilates classes emptied out, her followers dipping by the hundreds. I heard she moved, some rumor about a new gym in another city. Good riddance. Their social circle collapsed, mutual friends picking sides, mine mostly. At a charity gala, I walked in, my head high, my wig perfect. People whispered, but not about me. They whispered about him, the man who'd betrayed his sick wife. Financially, we clawed back what we could. The judge ordered Mark to repay the stolen funds, plus damages. Our savings were gone, but I got the house, the car, a chunk of his 401k. Sarah called it a win. "He's broke and disgraced," she said, handing me the final papers. I signed them in her office, the pen heavy but sure. It wasn't just money. It was my life, reclaimed. Mark tried to call once, left a voicemail. "Claire, I'm sorry," he said, his voice slurred. I deleted it. I didn't need his regret. I was rebuilding, stronger every day. My last chemo session was that month, and the scans were clear. I stood in my backyard, the spring sun warm on my face, and felt free. Not just from cancer, but from him. From all of it. So let me ask you, have you ever had a moment where you got perfect revenge on someone who wronged you? How did it feel, and do you think they learned their lesson? You know that moment when you finally see the pieces of your life start to fall into place after everything's been torn apart? That's where I was, standing in the aftermath of it all, watching Mark's world crumble while I started to rebuild mine. It was late spring, the kind of day where the sun feels like a promise, and I was sitting on my porch, a coffee mug warm in my hands, feeling something close to peace for the first time in years. Mark was drowning, and I'd handed him the anchor. The lawsuits hit him like a freight train. Sarah, my lawyer, had filed for fraud, identity theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. The courtroom was cold, all sharp angles and hushed voices, and I watched him squirm in his cheap suit, his lawyer stammering through weak defenses. The judge wasn't having it. "You opened a credit card in your wife's name during her cancer treatment?" she asked, her voice like a blade. Mark mumbled something, head down. The gavel came down hard. Restitution, penalties, the works. He was ordered to pay back every cent he'd stolen, over 50 grand, plus damages. His bank accounts were frozen, his assets seized. I heard he sold his car, that fancy Audi he loved, just to cover legal fees. It felt good, I won't lie. Not vindictive, just right. I got the house, free and clear, and a chunk of his retirement fund. Sarah called it a clean sweep. "You're set to start over," she said, handing me the final papers in her office, the city humming outside. I signed them, my hands steady, and walked out feeling lighter. The money wasn't just numbers, it was my security, my future, something he'd tried to rip away. I opened a new bank account, one he'd never touch, and watched the transfers roll in. Every deposit felt like a brick in a new foundation. My community rallied around me. Lisa and Jen threw a small party at my place, just us and a few close friends, string lights twinkling in the backyard. To Claire, Lisa toasted, raising her wine glass. "The strongest woman I know." Everyone cheered, and I smiled, my throat tight. They'd seen me at my lowest, bald and broken, and now they saw me standing tall. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles. Old friends texted support. "Heard about Mark," one wrote. "You deserve better." I did. Even my parents, who'd been distant during my treatment, called. "We're proud of you," Mom said, her voice soft. I cried after hanging up, not from pain, but from feeling seen. The satisfaction was sweet, like biting into a ripe peach. I'd spent months doubting myself, thinking I was the problem. Now, watching Mark lose everything, his job, his reputation, his charm, it was proof I wasn't crazy. I'd walk past his old office downtown, see the for lease sign, and feel a quiet thrill. He'd thought he could outsmart me, but I'd outplayed him. That power, that justice, it carried me through the days when the chemo fatigue still lingered. But justice doesn't just happen in a courtroom. It's what you build after. The legal proceedings wrapped up by summer, the judge's rulings final. Mark faced probation for the fraud, a criminal record that'd follow him forever. Cassandra got dragged into it, too, sued for receiving stolen funds. Her Instagram went silent, her Pilates empire a ghost town. I heard she was waitressing now, her filtered life shattered. Derek, Mark's bar buddy, got fired when his firm caught wind of the scandal. Their whole circle imploded, and I didn't shed a tear. I focused on healing. I started therapy, not the couple's kind Mark had skipped, but real work, just for me. My therapist, Ellen, had this calm way of cutting through my noise. "You survived more than cancer," she said in our first session, her office smelling of lavender. "You survived betrayal." I nodded, tears prickling. We unpacked it all, the loneliness, the gaslighting, the rage. I learned to forgive myself for trusting him, for not seeing it sooner. I wasn't weak. I was human. Physically, I was getting stronger. My hair was growing back, soft curls I'd never had before. I joined a yoga class, not Cassandra's kind, but a gentle one for survivors. The studio was warm, all wood floors and soft music, and I'd lie in savasana, feeling my breath, my body, mine again. I started walking every morning, the park near my house alive with birdsong. Each step felt like reclaiming ground he'd stolen. My scans stayed clear, and my oncologist clapped me on the shoulder. "You're a fighter," he said. I believed him now. Rebuilding my life took time. I sold the house, too many memories, and bought a smaller place, a cozy bungalow with a garden. I planted roses, their thorns a quiet reminder of my strength. I got a part-time job at a nonprofit, helping other cancer patients navigate treatment. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and it felt good to give back. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones. I even started dating, nothing serious, just coffee dates that made me laugh again. I was Claire, not Mark's wife, not a victim. Just me. Looking back, I learned hard truths. Trust is precious, but it's not blind. People show you who they are, and it's on you to listen. I'd spent too long making excuses for Mark, thinking love meant ignoring red flags. Never again. I learned I'm tougher than I thought, that I can fall apart and still rebuild. I learned justice isn't just punishment, it's taking back what's yours, your dignity, your future. I'd walk through fire again if it meant finding this version of myself. So let me ask you, do you believe that getting justice helps people heal from betrayal, or does it just create more pain? What's been your experience? You ever look back and realize you're not the same person you were a year ago? Not just older, but different, like you've shed a skin you didn't even know was weighing you down. That's me now, sitting in my little bungalow's garden. The roses I planted blooming red against the fence. It's fall, the air crisp with that smoky leaf smell, and I'm sipping tea, feeling like Claire again. Not the sick wife, not the betrayed one, just me. It took a long road to get here, but man, it's worth it. The cancer was the first fight, the one that stripped me bare. Chemo was brutal. Nausea that clung like damp clothes, nights where I'd stare at the ceiling, wondering if I'd make it. But I did. My last scan was clean, and I celebrated alone, standing in my kitchen, eating a slice of chocolate cake with my hands. No one to impress, no one to apologize to. Just me, alive. That victory was the foundation. Beating cancer taught me I could survive anything, even Mark's betrayal. I didn't just survive, though, I changed. I used to be the woman who'd shrink to make others comfortable, who'd say sorry for needing help. Not anymore. Therapy helped me see that. Ellen, my therapist, had this way of asking questions that cracked me open. "Who are you when you're not trying to please?" she asked once, her office warm with afternoon light. I didn't know at first, but I figured it out. I'm the woman who plants roses, who laughs too loud at bad jokes, who doesn't need a man to feel whole. I started saying no to toxic favors, to guilt trips, to anything that didn't serve me. It felt like stretching muscles I'd forgotten I had. New relationships grew from that. I leaned on Lisa and Jen, my rocks through it all. We'd meet for brunch, the cafe buzzing with clinking plates, and they'd tease me about my new haircut, short and bold. "You're glowing," Jen said once, her eyes soft. I was. I made new friends, too, at the nonprofit where I worked. There was Mia, a fellow survivor, who'd share stories over coffee breaks, her laugh like a spark. We'd talk about everything, treatment, dreams, the men we'd kicked to the curb. These weren't just friends, they were my chosen family, people who saw me for me. I even dipped my toe into dating. Nothing heavy, just a few dinners with a guy named Sam, a teacher with kind eyes, and a dog named Max. We'd walk in the park, leaves crunching underfoot, and he'd listen when I talked about my past, not with pity, but respect. "You're a badass," he said once, grinning. I laughed, but I felt it. I wasn't ready for love yet, but I was ready to feel alive, to flirt, to let someone see the new Claire. That was enough. Reclaiming my identity was the real win. I'd lost myself in Mark, in sickness, in the chaos. Now, I was finding her again. I took up painting, something I'd loved as a kid. My dining room became a studio, canvases leaning against walls, the smell of acrylics sharp and clean. My art wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Bold colors, messy lines, all heart. I hung one piece above my fireplace, a swirl of reds and golds, and every time I saw it, I remembered who I was becoming.
But it wasn't just about me.
It was about what I'd learned, the truths that settled deep in my bones. Trust is a fragile thing, I realized. It's not a gift you give blindly. It's earned, tested, built over time. Mark taught me that in the worst way. I used to think trusting someone meant ignoring doubts, but now I know better. Trust yourself first, your gut, your instincts. They're louder than any lie. I'll never silence mine again. Human nature's messy, too. People can be cruel, selfish, like Mark and Cassandra, chasing their own highs while others bleed. But they can also be kind, like Lisa bringing me soup during chemo, or Sam holding the door with that easy smile. Most people are both, I think, capable of hurting and healing. That's why you choose who gets close, who gets your heart. I'm pickier now, not because I'm bitter, but because I'm worth it. Resilience is the real magic, though. I used to think it meant never breaking, but it's the opposite. It's breaking, falling apart, and still choosing to stand up. I did that over and over. Through cancer, through betrayal, through nights when I thought I'd never smile again. Each time, I got stronger, like a bone that heals tougher after a break. That's what I want you to know. You can survive the worst things. You can lose love, money, health, and still find joy. It's not easy, but it's in you waiting. I look at my life now, my garden, my job, my friends, and I see hope. Pain carved me out, made space for something better. I'm not saying it was worth it. I'd never choose that hell again. But I'm grateful for the woman it made me. I'm wiser, braver, freer. I know my value, and I'll never let anyone steal it. That's my power, my redemption, and it's sweeter than any revenge. So let me ask you, what's the most important lesson you've learned from being betrayed or hurt by someone you trusted? How did it change you for the better? Here I am, sitting on my porch, the autumn sun dipping low, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold. My roses are still blooming, stubborn against the cooling air, and I'm holding a mug of tea, steam curling up like a quiet promise. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far I've come. A year ago, I was Claire, the sick wife, lost in Mark's lies, fighting cancer and betrayal all at once. I felt small, broken, like the world was slipping through my fingers.
But now,
I'm someone else, stronger, wiser, whole. And I want to talk to you about that journey because if I can come out the other side, so can you. It started in the darkest place. I was bald, exhausted, sitting in chemo chairs, thinking I'd lose everything. My health, my marriage, my hope. Mark's affair with Cassandra, the money he stole, the way he made me feel like I was the problem, it crushed me. But that pain, as brutal as it was, became my fire. I fought back. I gathered evidence, built a case, faced him down. I won in court, took back my life, my home, my dignity. That wasn't just justice, it was rebirth. I went from a woman who apologized for existing to someone who plants roses, paints bold colors, laughs with friends who feel like family. I beat cancer, beat betrayal, and found a version of myself I love. That's what I want you to hold on to. Betrayal, loss, the worst kinds of hurt, they don't define you. They carve out space for something better if you let them. You're tougher than you know, capable of standing up when everything feels like it's falling apart. I learned to trust myself, to listen to my gut, to choose people who lift me up instead of tearing me down. That's not just surviving, it's thriving. And you can do it, too. No matter what you're facing, there's a strength in you, waiting to be unleashed. Thank you for sticking with me through this story, for feeling the weight of it, the lows and the highs. You've been with me through the hospital rooms, the late-night tears, the courtroom victories, and now this quiet porch moment. It means the world to know you're out there listening, maybe seeing pieces of your own life in mine. If this story hit you, If it stirred something in your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's fighting their own battle, who needs a reminder they're not alone. And if you believe every betrayal teaches us something valuable about our own strength, hit that subscribe button. It's a way to say you're in this with me, that you're rooting for truth and resilience. I'd love to hear from you too. Drop a comment and tell me, what part of this story hit you the hardest? Was it the moment I found those emails, the confrontation with Mark, or maybe this quiet now, where I'm finally free? Your thoughts matter, and I'm all ears. One last thing. If you believe people deserve to know the truth about those who take advantage of them, subscribe. It's a small act, but it's a stand for justice, for survivors, for everyone who's ever had to rebuild. Only those who think victims should stay silent would look the other way. I know you're not one of them.